Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on data representation and data story and digital storytelling in the field of intangible cultural heritage. A special thank you to the speakers who are joining us today and to everyone attending, especially to our selected candidates from the open call of the project Notes and Patterns. A warm welcome. I'll be your moderator for these sessions in which we will explore several contemporary aspects of intangible cultural heritage, also folklore and historical popular culture. The webinar also introduces the term database storytelling, which is coined within the project, with the aim to explore how structured data and digital infrastructures can be used as a basis for data-driven narratives within intangible cultural heritage, but also more broadly in the interdisciplinary arts and humanities. The project is funded by the European Union and is a collaboration of three partner institutions, the BN Textile Art Biennial hosted by Karnika Institute in Slovenia, the Department of Ethnography of the National Museum in Gdańsk in Poland, and the Biennale of Western Balkans in Greece. So before we begin, just a quick notes. The webinar will run for approximately 3 hours. It's comprised of 3 sessions. We'll have a short Q&A time at the end of each presentation. And the webinar is being recorded and will be made available open access afterwards. So let's begin with session 1, titled Data-Driven Approaches to Intangible Heritage Representation. I'm very pleased to introduce our first speakers, Georgia Angelaki, a digital heritage specialist responsible for the network development at Search Culture, .gr of the National Documentation Center in Greece, and Elena Lagoudi, museologist responsible for the collections curation at Search Culture. Georgia and Elena, over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation, Mariana, and the introduction. Just give me a second so that I share my screen. Can you confirm you see my screen all right? I think I need to move this around.
Indeed, we see.
Yeah? Okay, good. I will be together with my colleague Elena, we're going to talk to you about how we use semantically enhanced structured data at Search Culture to tell stories about Greek culture and intangible cultural heritage in particular. First of all, let me introduce you to Search Culture. Search Culture is the national cross-domain cultural heritage data aggregator. Its goal is to provide a single point of access to all digitized cultural heritage from Greece, sourced from museums, libraries, archives, and various cultural institutions across the country. We're approaching 1 million digitized items, and we're also the national aggregator for Europeana, to which we have contributed around 690,000 items. More specifically, regarding traditional culture and living heritage, you can find collections of oral histories, proverbs and popular legends, customs, rituals, religious traditions, pictures of practices related to the use of natural resources, agriculture and husbandry, of the urban and physical landscape in the old days, and collections of craft items. For example, one can look for items related to the custom of Yanitsari and Boules in the city of Nausa in northern Greece, which is an element inscribed in the National Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And they can find images of the costumes, videos of the event, old photographs, painting, and various textual resources from different providers. So they can approach the custom from different angles. Now we dive into the kind of information we collect. What we see on the slide is an item record compliant with Europeana's data model, which is the model that we also use, and it is an object-centric model. We harvest and index an item's descriptive metadata, such as the title, the creator, the description, the date, the place, and more. We also ingest a copy of the digital item along with its accompanying standardized license. And we also always provide a link to the items page on the provider side, enabling users to view the item in its original context. As a large-scale cross-domain cultural heritage aggregator, we aim to use structured data in order to answer a user's basic questions such as who, what, when, and where. However, this is difficult because the metadata we ingest is highly heterogeneous. It varies in quality, often including spelling and grammatical errors. It may be presented in different languages. The level of documentation also varies. Sometimes it is very detailed, other times it is very general. And there are inconsistencies such as the use of singular versus plural form, the use of synonyms, and so on. So in the first example here, you see different ways the value photograph can be present in the original metadata. Unless we address this heterogeneity, we are not able to provide effective search and browsing capabilities. So what we do is that we match the various literal value variations to a unique linked data resource. For example, all the different spellings or terms for photograph are mapped to the linked data entity photo, which is unambiguously identified through its unique URI. This process is called semantic enrichment. Enrichments improve the quality and validity of data, add a layer of multilingualism to search, enable disambiguation of concepts and individuals, support the semantic interconnection of items found in many different repositories, and they're utilized in advanced search, as I will be showing you later. We enrich every record we ingest as per the persons, the places, the subjects, the historical periods, and the dates. For each category of enrichment, we have developed a vocabulary as linked data. The vocabularies are bilingual. In some cases, like for places, they're also hierarchical, and they link to other established semantic vocabularies like the UNESCO thesaurus, geonames, VF, Wikidata, etc. We're developing the vocabularies and performing the enrichments on the state-of-the-art platform called Semantics that we have also developed in-house. Our enrichment process is semi-automatic, meaning it is heavily curated, but it's supported by self-learning smart tools, which makes the process quite straightforward and fast. So this is the end product. This is how the enriched record looks like. We keep the original documentation intact, and we mark with pink the linked data values. Every pink value is a link to all items that have been enriched with this entity. So one can see all items related to Fred Boissonnas, in this case, all photos, all items related to Andritsena, which is a village in the Peloponnese, etc. Semantic vocabularies allow us to build advanced search and browsing capabilities. They serve as structured fields that can be used either individually or in combination to perform highly detailed queries. So for example, here I search for textiles as a type from Thrace, which is an area in Greece, and retrieve the results, which I can also see on a map. Each semantic vocabulary has its own browsing page. And another important functionality for searching intangible heritage material in particular is map navigation. For example, a user can zoom in on the map, in this case, the island of Karpathos, and use the semantic enrichments to filter their results. So these interconnected items, old photographs, textiles, decorated bread, proverbs, and an ethnological study from 1969 provide the mosaic of the island as it was a few decades ago. To conclude on my part, some observations regarding the digital representation of intangible heritage and search culture. There is a great wealth of collections of digital items related to intangible, living heritage, and traditional culture. However, legacy documentation and the data model used by search culture and Europeana are rather object and material culture centric, and which is not particularly suitable for documenting intangible heritage. Semantic enrichment, though, enable interlinking between objects and add context, enabling multi-entry search points into the items. So we don't make use of specialized vocabularies yet that pertain to intangible heritage, but it is in our future plans. And I will hand over now to my colleague Elena Lagoudi to continue on how we use this structured and semantically enhanced data to tell stories about the Greek intangible heritage. Thank you.
Hello from me. Give me a couple of minutes to connect my screen. So my colleague, yeah, everything okay? My colleague just explained to you how the search box works, and I'm here to tell you how we use the search box as a loom, trying to weave together stories using the exhibition query form. The exhibition query form is based on the search box, is the form we use to develop thematic exhibitions, virtual exhibitions, and it allows curators to begin with a conceptual query and refine it by selecting types, locations, creators, and subjects, sort of weaving together the filters and content to form a narrative. In the analog universe, it would follow the classic curatorial inquiry. So the curator would start by making a question, creating a 3D model, and curating the exhibition. In the digital universe, we do the same work by filtering, excluding, or layering objects. And this way, the exhibition becomes a sort of narrative space, a virtual space created through informed decisions and interpretive intention. The thematic exhibitions produced are, in essence, an assemblage of cultural heritage objects telling a story. They link together, they have semantic relevance, and highlight connections between people, places, events, and material culture. We base this on micro-learning and chunking trends. And it's important to say that the queries are dynamic. So every time a new collection comes in, the exhibition changes, gets enriched with more cultural heritage objects. We've developed a similar thematic exhibition based on people and the relationship between people, telling stories about people in Greek history that have formed groups, they've changed, they're connected by common beliefs. For both our discovery services, the thematic exhibitions and the portrait exhibitions, our principles are the same. We follow Europeana guidelines, editorial guidelines. We exploit the trends of chunking and microlearning. We echo the museum interpretation experiences, so we produce short, rich interpretative texts to offer context. And editorially, our strategy is to include both the monumental and the domestic, both the well-known and the unknown, the eponymous creators, anonymous creativity, male and female creativity. So we try to be to have a democratic eye in the way we look at our collections and tell stories that are not often told. In this vein, our thematic exhibitions around intangible cultural heritage try to illuminate ephemeral, performative, daily life, seasonal customs, local sayings, lore, kingsic practices, demotic songs, even more elusive parts of culture, such as olfactory heritage. The digital format allows us to contextualize these practices, often in a modular way, so linking them with each other and other relevant exhibitions. In the crafts exhibitions, we trace the artistry of the hand. We trace the tangible aspects of intangible heritage, but also we are trying to show to contextualize the history of textile with before and after. So we connect the material metadata, like type of craft or material, with geolocation and time. And this way we can expand even the questions we can ask of our digital records. So questions such as class. Does textile relate to class? Trade routes, highlight aspects of locality. In many cases, crafts are the women's intimate records. Crafts are, especially in the form of textiles, 90% women's labor. However, their names are stitched in the margins of the archive. In this example, the photographer captured the name of the place, of the picture he took in Aiassos, Lesbos, but not the name of the weaver. In fact, the only eponymous female craftswoman we have in such culture is Efrosini Faltides, who happens to be upper class from a rich, cultured, educated family of the islands. And that's where the aspect of class comes to place. Female crafts are often tied to place, not name. We can see this visibly in the map-based exhibitions. Women's work maps space. Man's work maps time. So metadata could be seen as a feminist lens through which one can discover the histories of female creativity and craftswomanship. We also try to narrate the before and after stories that tell, that discuss the learned processes of producing textiles, the cyclical economies, the matrilinear heritage practices, such as the making of the yarn, the dyeing, the spinning, the weaving, stitching, but also the maintenance and upkeep of fabrics, such as this exhibition about traditional water mills. And by making this effort, we try to give context and highlight the intangible aspects of tangible heritage, of crafts. So such exhibitions such as these offers us contextual background. They can broaden our understanding of cyclical economies and the small communities that produced such crafts. Let's not forget that textiles are intimate archives. They are worn on the skin, and they also crafted, worn, inherited. They sort of carry a form of touch magic, documenting big events in someone's life, from birth to death. Textiles always accompanied you in traditional cultures. So material objects such as wedding garments, grave textiles with the metadata provide a wealth of opportunities to study the material vocabularies of emotion. In this example, you see a roughly chronological series of Sarakatsani wolf aprons for all women's life stages, starting from a kid, a young girl, a girl who is in stage of wedding, at the age of to be wed, engaged woman, freshly married woman, a woman who just had a kid, a woman who wants kids, a woman who's been married for a while, a middle-aged woman such as myself, and they even show seasonal moving of the tribe, because this bunch of people moved around with their flocks. So this is the apron would be worn while she was on seasonal migration. These semiotics of these aprons are completely unreadable by us. These semiotics would be only understood by her fellow clansmen, and they would mark her life achievements and accomplishments. How do we get access to this kind of information through metadata? How do you get access to emotions attached to textiles in metadata? Perhaps using AI is an answer, because sometimes this information hides in the description field. So possibly using AI is something that we can utilize AI to extract those. And closing, I want us to linger a little bit on this metaphor that has run through much of what we said today, the textile. From threads of metadata to woven narratives of exhibitions, through this process, I dare say we've embarked on a kind of textilic thinking, a form of meaning making inspired by the properties and processes of textiles. So textilic thinking has influenced us in the way that when we our work on digital exhibition draws on this logic by interlacing metadata, text, imagery, geography. We create a layered narrative. In a way, the curator becomes a weaver. Interestingly enough, AI large language models such as ChatGPT are obsessed with words of weaving, tapestry, and it was asked why do you like weaving and textile so much? And it replied that I like it because it implies something complex, detailed, carefully constructed, combining rich imagery, symbolism, versatility, sensory appeal, and literary tradition. And maybe this is how we make sense of complexity, by pattern, structure, and beyond everything, connections. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yuria and Elena, for this presentation. It's impressive to hear what search culture is doing, and actually also reading in the abstract is among Europeana's leading aggregators. I'm wondering if you could share some insights into the next steps for the development of the infrastructure of search culture, perhaps also in alignment with common European data space for cultural heritage.
Yes, if I may. So we're kickstarting a new project now that we're participating in. It's called Pharos. It's one of the European AI factories. So as the national aggregator, we will be participating in the development of the Greek, let's say, branch of the data space for culture. The data space for culture is an idea. It's a concept that extends, builds on the European platform, and it will provide richer data sets for researchers and for commerce as well, and also tools for the researchers, for the cultural heritage institutions to be able to that are built on AI, and they will be able to perform, different types of work on the collections. So we're looking forward to this next step, let's say, which is the future for everyone. It's not a future, but it's like at our door. So it's the first time that we'll be tapping into this great opportunity. So yeah, this is more or less our next plans.
Great. And yes, exciting to learn more about that. And also maybe a question for the collection. You already said that you encountered that these collections, this kind of folklore intangible heritage collections, they already have some challenges or limitation, considering anonymous data, or how it is connected to more to space than to name. And so I'm wondering, what are some other challenges that there may be in documenting, or maybe not documenting, or any other verb that suits better in documenting intangible cultural heritage or folklore collections when compared to more conventional collections, let's say paintings. So based on your experience, are these collections generally well documented? Do you see, like, they are not obviously, but what kind of opportunities do you see for improvement?
If I may answer this one, I think that the same love you see people showing traditional painting collections, I think there is a lot of love shown for ethnological collections, especially in the beginning of the century of the archive fever, as Derrida said, in the 20th century. In Greece in particular, starting in the 20s and 30s of the previous century, a lot of both amateurs and scientists, ethnologists, went to the countryside and tried to grasp the dying pre-industrial societies, but in the media and the technologies available to them then. So they used microfilms, they used pencil on paper, and they produced these beautiful collections of cataloging all the aspects of intangible heritage of an area, but written with pen on paper. And this thing has been digitized, but is completely inapproachable by current audiences. A, because we can't read handwritten text anymore. We're not trained to read handwritten text. Only doctors can, probably. And then because we need to we need to find what is in store from all these old microfilms, photographs, and digitize them in real digital format, make them open, and really spend some time documenting the documentation that happened about 100 years ago. And once we start getting this material and using AI to extract, for example, handwritten text and make it readable, machine readable, then I think a whole wealth of opportunities open for this kind of material and studying it.
Thank you so much, Elena, for bringing up this perspective. And I would like to say that we can now move to our next speaker. Thank you so much, both, for this intriguing presentation. And we'll continue we'll continue the conversation. We're next with our next speaker shortly. If you just joined us, welcome again. You're attending the webinar of data representation and digital storytelling in the field of intangible cultural heritage, with a focus on textile heritage and digital as well as sustainable practices. I would like to welcome our next speaker for the first session, Sabine de Günther. She is an art historian and alumni of the Urban Complexity Lab at the University of Applied Science in Potsdam, Germany. Sabine, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. I hope you can see the screen, my screen. Thank you for the invitation, and very impressive, the exhibition tour, I must say. Okay, I will dive right into my topic. The structure of my presentation follows along these three aspects: methodology, the structuring, and the display of research data. And as you've already heard, how you organize your data, the depth of your modeling, the sources themselves have a huge impact on the possibilities you will have in presenting them. And it requires a collaborative effort, or efforts, communication, a lot of communication and competences from various disciplines. At least this is how we approached our project, Restaging Fashion. It was a 3-year project funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research and based at the UC Lab of the Potsdam University of Applied Sciences. The researchers at UC Lab come from various disciplines and work on the visualization of data collections, often project-based and in cooperation with data partners. The focal points are cultural collections, but also urban environment, environmental topics, or journalism in general. A key assumption at UC Lab is that explorative and dynamic approaches to data can generate new insights. Hence, it is seen and designed as an epistemic tool. With the asterisk marks from right to left, you see the team of Restaging Fashion. On the right, Marianne Dirk, head of the UC lab, then Linda and Ilias for data modeling and curation, Giacomo for interface design, and myself. Our team worked on bringing together items from the Lipperheide Costume Library in Berlin and the Germanisches Nationalmuseum in Nuremberg. And as the title suggests, the project was dedicated to the cultural history of garments, its appearance and symbolism, with the aim of enabling cross-source and multidisciplinary research on the objects. So we have digitized, indexed, contextualized vestimentary sources, anchored them in a data model, and enriched them semantically. We've also made them available both in an online catalog and in a data visualization. Although the work packages were developed with individual responsibility, decisions on which path to take and which tools to use or develop were made jointly and developed iteratively in line with the disciplinary needs. This form of co-design shown in the slide was described by Marianne Dirk and Boris Müller and others in the essay I mentioned below, and that I can also provide. Of course, this type of co-design applies to all aspects, not just the visualization. Now to methodology in dress research. The methodological approach in this project's dress research was to juxtapose and connect three different types of sources, that is, images, texts, and realia. The idea behind this is that the information value increases when contextualization and comparison is provided. But it's not only about enrichment, it also concerns art historical discourse, quite fundamentally the comparison of images, but also the questioning of sources and the argumentation with text, image, and dress. At the base of our digitization and research project lies a collection of paintings and miniatures from the Lipperheide Costume Library. This collection of more than 600 works has been deposited since 1934. And we built upon work from a previous project that I was part of. The paintings and miniatures depict dress of 4 centuries, starting in the Middle Ages. It's mostly portraits, a small number of biblical scenes, depictions of regional dress, as well as genre paintings. From the same Lipperheide collection, we selected, digitized, and documented 1,000 prints and drawings in order to contextualize the paintings. So I selected prints ranging from portraits, caricatures, to depictions of everyday life. Whereas I find the early modern costume books at the top right, pages from friendship books also on the top right, and from life drawings of regional costumes in the bottom left, the most fascinating. Moral writings on fashion are also among the selected prints. At the top left, for example, a print by Abraham Bosse, where French courtier discards lace, ribbons, and slashed sleeves on the chair in favor of a sober garment in accordance with the edict, the fashion edict of 1633. So as you can see, all the images have their very specific value as a source for fashion history. Initially, we also intended to include textual sources such as sumptuary laws, but we had to reduce the workload a little bit in our already very ambitious project. We only added a small number of dress codes, but we included unpublished archival material regarding the history of the Lipperheide collections. Our second partner, the Germanisches Nationalmuseum, kindly allowed us to scan some 15 garments, such as early modern doublets, dresses, vests, armor, or headgear. The selected garments are meant to enrich the pictorial and the textual sources with information such as volume, materiality, or a 360-degree view. In the following slides, I will show you the outcome, that is how we display and arrange the objects and the data, and which sort of entry points we created for the user. I've not mentioned it yet. As a knowledge organization system, we use the open source instance Omeka-S. And the slide shows the view of a single item in the so-called REFA catalog, which is a standard output by Omeka-S. All linked data items are clickable, and this is one way of maneuvering through the collection, in addition to the search and filter function. The REFA reader, REFA is the short form for restaging fashion, is our main outcome, and of course the result of many discussions around documentation, around the character of the sources, the data structure, as well as design considerations. 5 essays or entry points provide a nuanced discourse around historical dress and dress images. So the chosen form allows a lean back reading situation following narrative elements, as well as a free exploration of the holdings. This visualization showcases the artifacts in the column on the right, while positioning them in a narrative context. Every selection of an item then expands the visual graph structure to the right, just waiting for it to happen. There we go. Providing more context from the underlying collection. This is where a smooth transition from narration to exploration is happening, from a passive, more lean back mode to an active user-led mode. And of course, if you're done, if you don't want to follow, like if you want to go back to the text, you just click the X on the top right, and then you can go back to the text. Displaying high resolution and data-intensive 3D models of historic garments within the database Omeka-S would have required extra programming work. We therefore chose to provide the models on a platform which was developed at Cologne University and which has now been solidified by a task force in the NFDE for Culture Consortium and enriched with Wikidata. Both versions are freely available. So this short screen film shows the results of our 3D scans combined with photogrammetry. The inside is just a projection of the outside. If you have 3D objects in your collection, you might also want to try out the Voyager by the Smithsonian Institute. It's also freely available, and it allows to attach annotations to the 3D objects. It's also worth exploring their online collection and navigate Neil Armstrong's spacesuit. In a recent collaboration with the DH Lab at the University of Luxembourg, we have designed a prototype for linking the 3D models from restaging fashion with a narrative. To do this, I wrote up information in short paragraphs for the objects and then adapted the scenography so that the user reading the story is shown a corresponding view of the object. So this prototype allows several exploration modes, also pop-up images, but it is not linked to Omeka-S. But the prototype is also freely available, and it's also easy to implement. Now back to the data. The most discussed work package was the creation of a structure for already existing data from my previous project and for data yet to be created. So on the left, you see the XML data from the previous database, which was then exported and newly structured. The ontology we used was CDOC CRM because it is event-driven and it encourages a detailed description. The in-depth description of the data is accessible via observable notebooks. So it's open and free, and I will not go into detail here. We refer to the AAT vocabulary for concepts and to the TGN for geographic entities. Names and historic people are linked to the integrated authority file in the German National Library. In order to describe depicted visual items, we use icon class concepts. Representing textile material with controlled vocabularies proved to be difficult, if not impossible. We used a combination of AAT and icon class. For a differentiated classification of textile techniques, it may be worth taking a look at vocabularies such as the CETA vocabulary, the ECOM vocabulary of basic terms for cataloging costume, or of course the Europeana fashion vocabulary. As regards the data structure, we later added more vocabularies such as SCOS, DC terms, or linked art. And I hope to illustrate the reason for it in the next slide. The granularity in modeling was also a much discussed topic. With CDOC CRM in particular, one can express just every aspect of research in depth by semantic structures. But by introducing more vocabularies and by simplifying the structure, we try to balance the machine readable version versus the human readable representation. As art historians, scientific discourse follows certain methods. It builds like a narration with objects, events, evidence, and sometimes presents tentative conclusions. Describing findings is crucial, but in digital humanities, and certainly for data visualization, this approach must always be mapped in knowledge organization systems. While we were mapping research with data structures, we were asking ourselves what should be modeled as linked open data and what should be readable or writable as a free-form text, and questioned whether linked open data and art history are actually a good match. So it's always a trade-off, and we have recognized the need for an open space that allows to formulate tentative observations and ambiguity. We also looked into efficiency as regards the researcher's interaction with the data structure. And so for the reasons mentioned, we made some alterations and corrections along the way. For example, as mentioned, the combining CDOC with other more simplified description systems. But since the data structure forms the core of a graph-based visualization, we also recognize the need for readable data representation, for simplicity, for consistency, of course. And since we had multimodal sources, templates were created for paintings, for prints, for garments, events, actors, and an imported set of icon class items. Now for the fun part, the interactive navigation through the data. Stuart Card has described data visualization as an interactive visual representation of abstract data to amplify cognition. And this is an important concept for our understanding. We aim for a user-led exploration for a human-readable visual display with no fixed spatial dimensions. So visualizations also want to amplify insight, that is, offer interpretations, reveal something unseen, something unexpected. In this sense, visualization holds a lot of potential for empowerment. But of course, we do need to be careful about who's talking to whom and these scenarios and what opinions are ultimately left out. A dominant principle, in data visualization is the overview first approach. When you look at the image on the right, which offers a collection overview as an entry point, followed by multi-object previews and in-depth information on the level of single object previews. So immersion into the collection happens on different levels of granularity, and each level provides a different quality of insight. But we took a different approach. We set off with collaging, analog and digital, in co-design workshops with different groups. We identified single images or groups of images, topics, genre that needed more contextualization. And I created more in-depth networks of images, still working with the mural board, from early modern costume books here in this slide, tracing depictions of national stereotypes across different illustrated books. We then properly kicked off the narration aspect with one family portrait that lent itself to narrating different topics. The discovery that the painting is a portrait of 5 siblings, and we know their names, the discovery of the artist, the fashionable garments, or the depiction of the siblings as the 5 senses, which would also connect to more 5 senses in the collection. So we identified as key elements texts, graphs, and media, which we wanted to visualize. The next step was to connect text and data entries from OmicaS, leading to a graph-based narration. And texts written in Markdown format in GitHub could reference to items in OmicaS, to item sets, to all types of concepts, or to images. And of course, icon class, the classification icon class plays a vital role in this. This schema tries to give an overview how sources and data feed into the various interfaces. So we work with OmicaS, Markdown, Compact, with observable notebooks. The outcome was also observable notebooks, but also the REFA catalog, the REFA reader, and of course the landing page. The recent observable notebook software has built-in visualization tools, and we already used them in the documentation process as an epistemic tool. The REFA reader is freely available on GitHub, and I've used it in a course at the design department where students chose their favorite data visualization prototype in order to describe art historical discourses. Other prototypes from the UC Lab, in particular the VCOS viewer on the left for cultural heritage, have been used widely in cultural institutions as well as in seminars. But I would also like to draw your attention to a recent project at UC Lab, the Amazonia Future Lab. The prototype contextualizes intangible cultural heritage from the Brazilian Amazon region. And one of the outcomes is the Wanderer, a framework that devises an interface for data production and linking data with film media, as well as for data presentation, with a strong focus on its application in exhibition settings. And with this, I've come to an end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sabine. This was all very intriguing. One of the many remarkable achievements of the Restaging Fashion project is actually that that all this aspiration from the start and this ambition, you managed to translate it into concrete and genuinely intriguing results. So. I guess that maybe we can move based on our time to our next speaker. We would like to welcome Sofie. Sofie from Sofie Veramme, digital strategist from the Werkplaats Immaterieel Erfgoed from Bruges, Belgium. So over to you, Sofie.
Paula, thank you very much for having me. Such a wonderful, very, very interesting presentations. The last two have been already filled up with questions, and I'm very curious to see where everything is going. I'm going to talk a bit more about ethical data strategy for intangible cultural heritage. And the past two presentations have been more on object-based data, but I will talk about, to make it clear, so immaterieel erfgoed.be is our website, our platform, where we gather every information on intangible cultural heritage practices in Flanders, and it's a participatory approach. So it means that the communities, the groups, and the individuals share their own practices. So we don't write them for them, they fill in a registration form, and in that registration form, what they fill in, so what their names are, their places are, description of their practice, that becomes the data. And that's a different approach than an object-based approach that we have seen before, because the data is not a painting or an image or a movie, but it is the practice itself. So in a data model way of thinking, it's something completely else, makes it also a bit more complicated, but let's move on. So when we were, last year, we had a project on persistent identification, because the last versions of our website, the main focus was on getting the descriptions of the practices on the internet. So there was no really a data way of thinking of it. But we've been thinking about moving on a bit more and getting this kind of information present on the internet, but also out of its silo, and really making it interoperable and tangible, and making it make connections with the objects in the museums that are based on this intangible heritage. For example, designs of the textiles of the giant practices here in Belgium, or other kinds of objects in the museums or with the communities themselves that are already described in the catalogs of the museums, but are not necessarily attached to the practice itself. So that was what we were going to do, or what we wanted to do. So we wrote a project about it. And then we found out, of course, that doing it, adding persistent identifiers is not that hard, but if you want to do it in an ethical way, aligned with the UNESCO convention, we have to really think about an ethical strategy to do so. So to make sure that the autonomy and the agency of the communities, the groups, individuals are very much kept at the center of our practice, rather than just adding them and linking them. So on the one hand, you have the tension of the very static, very hopefully robust data structure or data practice online. And then on the other hand, the messiness and the fluidity and the being alive of intangible heritage and how that changes to match those two. And there's been a bit of an adventure to attach those two. So we've been looking for a framework to do so. How can we work on the way? And we've been aligning several ethical principles with data principles. And of course, we've been looking for ways to build on. So we have, of course, the UNESCO Convention for Safeguarding Intangible Heritage, which very much places the unique consent forward. I've been working with the shared stewardship principles of the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, which I hope that they can continue their very important work. Seeing the political situation now, I hope they can really keep doing this kind of stuff, because we build on it. And then, of course, we have the data principles, the fair and care principles. We've been working a lot there. And then the data sovereignty and data lifecycle. And those we've been putting together. So you can see them here. We have the data lifecycle, the different parts of it. Then we have the fair principles and the care principles. And we try to align those. Well, maybe to make sure the care principles are a set of principles designed by, and I'll have to think about the GIDA, it's called Global Initiative for Indigenous something. But they've really been meant to make, to be complementary to the FAIR principles, but it's not because they're meant to be complementary that it doesn't always. So it's also a bit of a practical way of thinking about what can we make work. But most important things are the digital return for the communities, the groups, and the individuals. So everyone benefits actually from the data shared, authority to control. So the free, prior, and informed consent is both for the data as for the sharing, the reuse, which also means that, and that's a bit in compared to the FAIR principles then. For example, if we make a description, or there's a description of a practice, it's been online, it has had a persistent identifier, but the communities change or the practice changes, or it becomes a bit more, for example, in Belgium, we have this tradition, it's a local tradition where fish get swallowed. It was very recent now, but given the new laws on animal well-being, it became prohibited, so it changes. So the way people think about this kind of traditions. So that was not this case, but sometimes people want to withdraw their description from the website. We have never really it hasn't happened yet, but it's something we see happening in the future maybe. But that means that if you have a persistent identifier, which should be forever on the internet, you have to be able to say like this link is no longer persistent. So we have to find this opt-out option we should offer. So that means that there's also a responsibility from the data manager to make sure that the communities, the groups, individuals understand what's happening with their data. So it also means that there's a data literacy, so that they can know that there's an option to withdraw, or that there's an option that if you agree to having your persistent identifier on a website, that it will get linked to objects in museums, etc., and that they don't have the control to decide on which objects gets links, because it's of course the museum that uses the PURI as a authority then for the practice. So that kind of thing is very much the responsibility of us adding the persistent identifier. So it means it's a whole package of ethics revolving around this data lifecycle. But of course you have to make it machine readable, because if we just include it, it's a bit, it doesn't really make sense if it's just readable. So we have this cultural metadata we want to add to all our practices. It means it has provenance, protocols, and permissions. Which being the provenance, of course, is the author information. Protocols gives context and information, intents on the data use, and then permissions is more towards the legal aspects of the reuse of the data. And then again, data governance rests on 4 pillars. I will go a bit faster. So to do so, we made a very practical instrument. It's called FAIR and CARE matrix, to really test our current practice towards the ideal of all these principles put together. And I will show you, hopefully it goes, voila. It's a bit small, voila. So we all put them together, and then we made the current situation to the other situation, what actions are needed, and then the action category is in what part of our platform the action is needed. It's also, we're now in the process of moving from our current website to a new platform, and we're going to use all these things that came up to implement them in our new website, or hopefully try to implement them. But having this base really to make sure that if we go to the new registration form, we have a base on how to do this on an ethical way. And also it's a very transparent way of telling your communities and the people you work with, this is how we work and this is how we want to do it. And it serves as a kind of promise and a very transparent way of communicating on your data strategy. But also, which is a thing we also run into, the registration form is already quite complex to gather those kind of data from the communities. There's often people not very busy with data aspect, and they're just doing their practice and they want to get it known. So we also wanted to not have too many barriers going on. So it's always a bit of a balance going on. Do I still have time? Yes. So those are the actions where it came together. We had the registration form, the opt-out, but we also had the terms of use and privacy policy. GDPR, for example, is such a thing. Then the data model, which is quite complex. and the UX and backend developers, it all has to kind of weave into each other. And then, of course, we have the legal and the ethical aspects of the reusing of the data. Do I have time to get deeper into it? I will try. So as you all are very well aware, the current intellectual property and copyrights are not sufficient enough to work with intangible heritage, especially with community-led initiatives, the collectivity, changing of the authors, changing of economic compensations, often for communities, all that kind of things. So it doesn't match the fluidity again, and the messiness of intangible heritage again. So we've been looking on how can we make sure that we can somehow protect our communities. So for audiovisual materials, Creative Commons is a very easy, very structured data way of working with it. And the reuse of knowledge, the protocols, we've been looking into traditional knowledge labels from local contexts, which very much aims more to community-specific rules and responsibilities. So these are the little labels. Now, the thing about traditional knowledge labels is that it's a separate platform. While we have our own platform, and it's not very desirable to have working with two platforms, it's also not always as applicable for our Western practices or the most practices we have on our platform. It's also not very well known yet, so it's a bit a balance on how can we work with those, because they offer great information, but will it be effective? That's another question. So we've been looking into Creative Commons Plus, so having the Creative Commons and then eventually have another label added to it. But it's all very much not an experimental phase, seeing we've going to move to a new website, a new platform. But the plan is to make a decision tree in the registration form, where the communities and people making the description can very easily click through. We can inform them very well, like, do you want this or do you want this? So we want to strive to have a balance between a too complex registration form and the information we actually need to make the data fair and care, but also make it interesting for people to access it. So again, it's much about rights awareness, data literacy. Voila. So to make it so, this fair care matrix really aims for a pragmatic and also user-friendly data practice, so we can actually grant them this digital return and make them available on the internet and enrich the data, because of course it's a dream once we have our descriptions and our registrations in structured data, we can enrich them, and it can, on the other hand, on websites of the museums, we can just make a greater experience and share and connect so much more information and make it really valuable also on aggregation platforms, etc. Voila. Also, maybe very important to note is that when people put their descriptions on our websites, it's from this idea that they want to be known, which also makes it easier than having a platform where you collect everything in an exhaustive way. We just give people the opportunity so they can withdraw as well, but it also makes it easier, so we don't have to have systems in place where we really have to guard off information. So that's the next thing. Well, I've put some extra information on the slide here, and if you have any questions, my email is there as well. And this little saint is called St. Martin, which is a gifter's saint for children. It's a really nice cookie. Voila.
Thank you so much, Sofie. Such important and critical questions that you put. Maybe you can put one of the links also in the chat later. There is also a question because apparently applying ethics in the ICH field presents unique challenges, and I see the question of Elena Lagoudi. She's asking what happens when we have to protect the rights and well-being of a community whose practice is now posed by other communities. For example, the dancing bear artists, the fur clothing makers, the animal circus communities whose rights come into direct conflict with anti-speciesist communities, and new animal protection laws. Bullfighting is another example.
Yes, I think it's a very real question for everyone working with intangible heritage. And I think the way we approach it is more that we work with living heritage. So to keep your tradition alive, it has to be alive, so it changes. And I think that's a very important message to give. It's not my specialty to talk about this, but I think what we have seen also with the practice with the little fishes now that we've been as the workshop Intangible Heritage, we're not only registering or the intangible heritage, but we're also giving our expertise to the communities, but to local governments and heritage institutions as well. And we very much put forward this model of dialogue, working together as well with people opposing, as a people from the tradition wanted to keep it alive, and we search for solutions in how can the tradition be or the practice be a little bit tweaked that it is acceptable for everyone. For example, it's not a very recent example, but in a town very close to where I grew up, that was in Ypres, maybe you know it, there's this tradition called, in English, kattenstoet. And it is a medieval tradition where they would throw cats off the bell tower. So obviously that's not it's connected also with the textile history of the city from the Middle Ages. Obviously now they're throwing off little plush animals. So a little plush, how you say, teddy bear kind of cats. So that's and it's something that worked, but it changes, and it's a very difficult process. But if you take it from then towards the data perspective, it's also which makes it more harder to put it in a data model. To come back to if you have several, when is a tradition or a practice enough change to make it a different practice? So we've been working with different versions of the same description of the practice, but giving it a different persistent identifier. And when does it happen? So it's also that kind of thinking, or what kind of practices are linked enough together to make it a cluster. Like, for example, the St. Martin, the cookie I showed you, it's with a lot of regional differences. So when is it the same tradition, or is it based on different local? So, and how do you put that in data? Which data model do you use? And how do you put your location data in because it's regional, but is it location or is it a place? And what if the place changes? So it's all difficult questions for data-wise.
Difficult, but critical to ask.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for this. Because what I'm thinking is that on the one hand, there are intellectual property frameworks that often fail to recognize collective or non-Western concepts of ownership, and on the other hand, you showed us some ethical tools which are non-binding, like the traditional knowledge labels. Which try to find to bring an attempt to provide workarounds. So I'm wondering if like the one that you described, the case that is close to where you live, but are you aware of very quickly? Are you aware of any cases where ethical tools were applied but not respected, maybe in Belgium or elsewhere, where it could lead to tensions, to certain misunderstandings, or even legal or ethical disputes regarding the use of ICH?
Well, in Belgium, certainly not. Not that we are aware of, because this way of working with the descriptions we put online is basically because they want to share it, but it's not like you have this very well-known example. I think it was in Romania with the textiles and the patterns being used. That kind of examples, I think they're pretty well known. And we worked together with Monica Bota also, I think I pronounced her name right, who has a 3C model for this kind of thing. So it's about consent, it's credit, and it's also compensation for the communities and the groups. But I can provide links later on as well. So we've been aware of this kind of cases happening, but we have no specific experience with it happening, especially not when there was already information provided on how to use information. And it's not, the cases that are best known are like copyright violations of photographs being used, or a photographer who's at an event and taking pictures sometimes, and then the community is not happy with that particular picture, and then you have to kind of negotiate between them. But I don't really think it's about intangible heritage being shared, but more about people and humans.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
We've
so
been
much.
working with several ways and several tools to work around these ethics, and been trying as well. We've worked with the Wiki Loves Living Heritage, and then the playing cards deck for ethics of open sharing. So, and there's like we've been working on a website called Filming Living Heritage, providing tools for communities and heritage institutions to document their safeguarding of their community, and how they can work also with the ethics and the legal aspects of it. But it's a search. It's not very easy.
I see, and all the best with the new website and platform. Thank you so much, Sofie, for the discussion, and if you can also provide the links of your presentation. Good. So with these insightful presentations, we conclude session 1 titled Data-Driven Approaches to Intangible Heritage Representation, from the webinar Data Representation and Digital Storytelling in Intangible Cultural Heritage, as part of the Notes and Patterns project, which is co-funded by the European Union. And I would like to thank very much the attendants and the speakers of this session.